Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our ABB Energy Industries Tech Talk series. My name is Leah Oxford, and today's webinar is focused on cybersecurity. Remote is the new norm, addressing cybersecurity to enable remote operations. I will be joined today by two speakers. Our first speaker, Ronan O'Sullivan, who is the digital lead for Energy Industries, and our second speaker, Ben Dickinson, who is the Digital Operations Manager for Cybersecurity. And with that, I will pass it over to Ronan.
Thank you very much, Leah. So today we'll start off with a safety moment, like we always do in ABB. Then we'll step through cyber risk and minimum controls that can be put in place, as well as take a look at something ABB has been working on for some time now, our cybersecurity reference architecture. And then we'll go into some details about remote connectivity, especially around connecting your control systems remotely, as well as people. And then we'll leave some time for questions and answers. Next slide, please. So for the safety moment, with most of us working from home today, it's necessary for us to keep cybersecurity on the top of our minds, even for our home networks. So as you can see from the slide, we recommend that you separate your networks into three different networks. One being your main, so use this for your personal connectivity as well as your families. A guest network, as well as then any type of smart devices like smart speakers, smart appliances. For the main network, keep the password complex. Use capital letters, symbols, numbers, etc. For the guest, you can keep it a little more simple, but change that password on a frequent basis. And then with smart devices, some people might not realize, but this is where most of the vulnerability can happen from a security standpoint. So message here, protect your critical data. Next slide, please. So I'd like to start off with an overview of cybersecurity risk. Then we'll step through a phased implementation approach and some minimum mitigating controls to consider to support your cybersecurity needs. So now, more than ever, with the current situation, with our workforce predominantly working remotely and the adoption of digital solutions in our industry, there's a growing concern related to exposure to cyber risk. It's basically in every conversation that we have today. So despite the growing concern, the good news is that cyber risk definitions and the recommended controls remain the same. So when we think of cyber risk, such as malware, human error, or limitations to existing assets, we can consider two categories: exposure to vulnerabilities and lack of sufficient controls within a system network. So if we take a closer look at exposure to vulnerabilities, this is typically in the form of a malicious software, like malware, that is intended to cause harm to a system. This can be delivered in the form of a phishing attack or weak controls around devices such as USBs. Another risk area to consider is connecting industrial control systems to a network. These control systems might have assets that may not have been designed with security in mind. They lack the security controls. So it's important to have a program structure that addresses the people, process, and technology needs to establish an acceptable security posture. So why does all of this matter? First and foremost, we want to increase the safety of our people by mitigating cyber risk. The impact of a cyber incident could generate unsafe work conditions. From the financial side of things, An incident could cause unnecessary downtime, which in turn impacts production and decreases revenue. Other areas of financial impact are government regulatory requirements that are being enforced. So when not followed, this would result in hefty fines. So next slide, please. So let's take a look at some of the challenges that our industries are facing today. Let's face it, there's an overload of guidance on how to approach cybersecurity. There's IEC with IEC 62443. We have NIST, we have NERC. We also have local country guidelines, as well as internal company standards that need to be followed. So the challenge is that these targets keep moving with updates to the standards. Challenges around manual processes that are still in place today make basic tasks like managing inventory of network connected assets time-consuming and vulnerable to human error. Having visibility into your environment and knowing the assets on the network are critical for knowing what to protect and how to respond in the event of an incident. Point solutions can be very useful to solve one piece of the puzzle. However, for addressing cyber risk from a holistic approach, a clear strategy and phased approach over time that focuses on cybersecurity capabilities as opposed to products is key. So next slide, please. So regarding a phased approach, we are recommending a 3-step process for maturing your cybersecurity posture. Number 1, addressing the basics of implementing the minimum cybersecurity requirements. Number 2, once in place, managing those controls in a routine manner. And finally, optimizing your program with experts and advanced operations. The majority, and we estimate roughly 70%, of your cybersecurity can be addressed in step 1. This helps apply preventative measures and limiting your attack surface. Cyber basic security controls have been around for many years and are still very effective today. Combine this with the continual assessment activities and training. This will really help you understand the current security posture, as well as keeping your workforce knowledge level high. So any type of optimization or advanced operations will take time to develop. Once step 1 and 2 have been accomplished, we can then take a look at step 3 of your cybersecurity implementation journey. So next slide, please. So what you'll see here is our overview of our cybersecurity portfolio in the respect of solutions, as well as services. So I won't go into all the details of the various topics that you see here on the screen. However, it's important to realize that we have positioned our portfolio to align with this phased maturity approach. So if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to Ben, myself, or your local ABB representative in order to take the conversation further. So next slide, please. So let's take a look at what ABB has been developing for some time around our reference architecture. So next slide, please. So ABB spent a lot of time and energy into developing this reference architecture. What we have done is taken our cybersecurity knowledge across various industries, oil, gas, chemicals, power, and water, and consolidated best practices to develop a template solution across the verticals. We wanted this to be broad enough to address multiple control systems and provide guidelines for adding security control points into your network. Our goal is to provide you with an efficient way of onboarding new cybersecurity and digital solutions. With that said, let me turn things over to Ben to look at our reference architecture in closer detail. So
Thanks.
Next slide, please.
Thanks, Ronan. Yeah, I'm really excited to bring you the reference architecture and give you a quick technical overview. This is something that we've been, as Ronan says, working on for quite some time and put quite a lot of effort into. So it's really good to start showing it to people. Some of the key components there, you can see an overview of the different network levels and the different structure of the reference architecture. The basic idea behind the reference architecture, as Ronan touched on, was to have this common platform, this common concept for an architecture, which is based on industry standards. So if you're familiar with the Purdue model for reference architectures and IEC 62443, we've essentially taken those industry best practices and standards and built a reference architecture, a basis for building a system on ABB's control systems. So what you'll notice there is that the different assets are placed at a different level in the system. And what that allows you to do is group assets according to their criticality in terms of operation and value to the organization, and also group in assets with functionality as well. This has the benefit of being able to group your assets into what you call zones and conduits, and then it makes things like applying security controls easier, because then you can apply a particular level of control based on the perceived risk to those assets and the criticality of the organization. It then also allows you to restrict communication between those zones and areas of the system, and ultimately to external networks. So the obvious risk is allowing connection out to the internet. By implementing this type of reference architecture, you can restrict the traffic that can come in and the connections that can come into your DCS, and also monitor it for monitoring purposes. You'll also see that by having these what we call bottlenecks of network traffic between the different zones through the firewalls, it sets you up nicely to carry out this network monitoring. So quite often there's some blind spots in the network that need additional sensors. It can be quite a difficult piece of work to implement network monitoring as an add-on once you build a system, for example. So by achieving a reference architecture, it's a lot easier to start monitoring, especially the more critical areas of your system. It also helps with risk assessment. So by having groups of areas of the system, these zones and conduits between different parts of the network, it allows you to build a top-down approach to risk assessment. First of all, assessing the organization or the DCS as a whole, and then assessing areas of your system which are segregated from one another, and applying what you call security levels to each of those zones based on the perceived risk to those areas of your system. And the other thing that it allows us to do is build what you call a reference architecture gap assessment. So we can look at any system's architectural setup, and we can do an assessment against this industry best practice standard and identify with relative ease the work required to move from the current architecture to this ideal reference architecture, so that you can increase the security of your system. So if we move to the next slide, please. The next thing I wanted to go through is just describing what the reference architecture is, and there are some common misconceptions, generally three of those. The first is that The reference architecture isn't going to make you 100% secure. It will form a basis for making your system more secure. It allows you to implement and maintain security controls with a lot more ease. It allows you to understand your system better and assess your system better. But implementing the reference architecture alone will not make it, like any other security control, will not make you 100% secure from that process alone. The second thing is it's not going to make you 100% compliant either. So a reference architecture is just a small portion of your cybersecurity management system as an organization. A very important part of your management system is deploying this reference and secure architecture, and it will make you compliant with those parts of 62443 that talk about secure architecture and implementing secure controls. But in isolation, it won't make your organization compliant with 62443. And the last thing as well is that it's not a blanket approach. So we're not saying that that image on the previous slide is what you should implement to the letter. It's just a guideline, a basis for communication. So what we can do is start with a common concept and terminology, and then we can maybe address some of the particular challenges of a certain implementation of ABB systems. For example, with distributed systems that may have satellite communications between, there may be some challenges in implementing that sort of reference architecture that we've seen earlier. So what we'll do is use the reference architecture as the basis for discussion, and then identify where there are certain challenges that make suitable modifications. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at some of the benefits, the main benefits of implementing a reference architecture. The first one is around resilience. So essentially, deploying an architecture is going to help you better understand your system and what it comprises of. That allows you to identify things like what vulnerabilities exist in your system, how an attacker might attack your system, and ultimately deploy security controls that are going to mitigate those risks. And as Ronan mentioned earlier, these minimum security controls that you put in place, by deploying a reference architecture, it makes it a lot easier to deploy that set of minimum cybersecurity controls to get to a baseline level of risk. And statistics show that you can reduce your cyber risk by around 80% simply by implementing a reference architecture, minimum basic security controls such as backups, patching, antivirus, and intrusion detection capabilities. The second benefit is compliance. So although we talked about the reference architecture not helping you to achieve complete compliance against 62443, but what it does is it allows you to demonstrate that your system setup is aligned with 62443 guidance, and you can easily demonstrate some of the requirements of that standard, such as applying security levels to parts of your system, partitioning your system into zones and conduits, and implementing certain security controls that apply to those security levels that you want to achieve on your network. The next one's really important, is around documentation, and that ties in nicely with compliance. So to be compliant, you need to be able to say why you do something, how you do something, and then you need to be able to provide evidence to say that you've done it. And that revolves a lot around documentation. So by leveraging ABB's documentation around the reference architecture, you're 3/4 of the way there, basically. So ABB have documented the reference architecture. We've carried out risk reviews, compliance reviews, and we've documented all the data flows and firewall rules between those network layers and zones and conduits. So you'll get a set of documentation that allows you to show how you're compliant with 62443 and modify it to a suitable level based on how you've modified your reference architecture. And the last one there is around supporting digital solutions. We all know that with implementing the digital solutions requires quite often that you're connecting through public networks. So it's of the utmost importance that this is done in a secure way. By implementing a reference architecture with secure remote access, which we're going to come on to, that allows you to implement digital solutions with confidence. that you're not going to compromise cybersecurity and increase the cybersecurity risk in the process. The next slide, please. So what I wanted to do on this slide was give you a basic overview of the three most popular ways in which the reference architecture is applied and provides benefit in terms of cybersecurity. The first one is a remote access platform, which we're going to discuss next. What the reference architecture does is it gives you a secure setup to give you confidence that by applying a remote access platform to provide remote engineering or deploy some other digital solutions, that it's done in a secure way and doesn't increase the cybersecurity risk to an unacceptable level as a result. So just to give a quick example of that, the ABB remote access platform will only allow outbound connections initiated from the ABB PCS through a single port number and to 2 ABB-owned IP addresses across the public network. And that's the way in which we set up our system to ensure that any remote access is restricted as far as possible and kept secure. The second one there is around security update. So patching your system. It's very important that when a vulnerability has been discovered on a Windows system, for example, that the time between that vulnerability being detected to the point in which your system is made secure from that vulnerability is kept to a minimum as possible. And what this reference architecture setup, along with a suitable remote access, allows you to do is what we can greatly reduce the time it takes from discovering a vulnerability for Microsoft to release a patch for that vulnerability, and then the point in which ABB can then test it against the DCS versions, and we can remotely get those patches deployed onto your systems as quick as possible in order to protect your system against the threat that's posed. So a good example is around cyber criminals and ransomware. If cyber criminals discover a vulnerability in a particular Windows version that they feel is used across the energy sector, then what we wanted to be able to do is ensure that ABB can test the patch that was released by Windows as quick as possible and get it deployed onto your system so that you don't become a victim of their new capability. And similarly there with antivirus update, what we'd like to do is make sure that through the reference architecture setup, that all your endpoint systems with antivirus, malware protection, or what's called endpoint protection software has up-to-date signatures that can detect the latest malware. So working hand in hand with the update, vulnerability is detected on a particular system. We're working really hard as quick as possible to deploy a patch to stop that vulnerability being existing in ABB systems. And at the same time, when that cyber criminal has developed the malware to exploit that vulnerability, we can get the signatures in your antivirus software updated as quick as possible to be able to detect that malware that gets developed against that vulnerability. So they're the three main use cases for the reference architecture. Next slide, please. And this is where I'll hand over to Ronan.
Thanks very much, Ben. So let's take a closer look at remote connectivity and what that means from a control system standpoint, as well as connecting our people. So next slide, please. So we've seen a rise in demand, especially during the current situation, for remote support. So for any solution that enables remote connectivity, you want to think about security controls in 3 areas: secure data collection and transmission, access controls, and having a trusted audit trail in case there are issues. So from a securing data collection and transmission, this occurs in the architecture of your solution. So making sure firewalls are in place and that the proper segmentation of servers are addressed. Secure protocols should be used, and there are limitations in outbound communications. We ultimately believe that it is important that you, as the asset owner, maintain the access controls. So let's take a deeper dive into how remote access platform works, which is utilized for connecting our control systems. So next slide, please. And Ben, please walk us through the details.
Yeah, thanks very much. So the second thing that I'm really excited to bring to you is the ABB's remote access platform. This is a solution developed by ABB, which is for enabling secure remote connectivity. Been around for several years now, and is deployed widely across ABB's systems. The primary use for connecting this remote access platform is connecting ABB engineers or customer engineers to a remote site. Sorry, thus saving costs and increasing quick reaction times. So essentially what we can do is we can have ABB engineers on standby and have quick response to any system issues, to any corrective maintenance activities, or even preventive maintenance activities that are required. We could save the cost of mobilizing those engineers and eliminating the travel to get to these remote sites. And what it also enables you to do is have access to these experts globally. They don't need to be in region. They can be anywhere in the world on 24/7 call and access the system very quickly to respond to any issue. During recent events, this has led to time cost savings, leading to more essential to continue in operations. So just to go over that, the remote access platform is going to provide you with quick response times to critical issues. We'll have ABB engineers on 24/7 call out path who can be anywhere in the world and can be mobilized quickly, saving costs on travel and mobilization. And they can perform services such as security update, keeping your system secure, corrective and preventative maintenance. And this is all done in a secure way with multiple levels of authentication, ensuring that any network traffic across public networks is encrypted, and we restrict, like I was mentioning earlier, connections to the remote site to only a single port and to 2 IP addresses owned by ABB. The other benefit is that these remote sessions can be controlled by the local engineers. So not only can you monitor the system and the connection, you have the complete control as to initiating the connection and to terminate it as well, so you see fit once the work has been completed. And next slide, please. So this final slide from the remote access platform brings together the concept of the reference architecture along with the remote access platform. You can see on the right there an overview of how a remote engineer would connect to a remote site. As you can see, there are multiple security control points. There are firewalls between each step in the connection process. The user will first log into what's called the ABB domain, whether that's on a secure ABB laptop in a secure location or on an ABB corporate IP system. Once into what's called the service center, which is an ABB service center, then a connection is made across the public network to the customer site, and then from there, what's called the virtual support engineer software, unlike a standard virtual private network software, can actually introduce some granularity around what that engineer can do functionally. So typically with VPN software, once you get into a network, you kind of have a set of sort of authentication that allows you to unrestricted access within that particular network based on your authentication level. With this tool, it allows you to go that one step further and just restrict the login users' functionality to particular functions associated with their work. Also, like I was mentioning earlier, we can have local staff on site who are monitoring their access, restricting the access so that the connections time out over a certain time, can only carry out certain functions, and can be terminated and monitored using intrusion detection as well. So to summarize then, by coupling the reference architecture that you see on the left there with a secure remote access platform that's been set up correctly and securely, you can continue your operations remotely whilst staying secure in the process. Next slide, please. And I'll hand over to Ronan.
Thanks, Ben. So now I'll touch on one of the ABB solutions that we have to connect our people. So our ultimate goal here is to have subject matter experts sitting remotely, being able to see what our people in the field are seeing, what they're looking at, what are they trying to troubleshoot. So here from the picture, we're utilizing a hands-free type of AR/VR device in order to even increase safety for the people. So have them hands-free as they're troubleshooting. It could be different types of use cases. In this particular picture, you'll see an IO cabinet where the technician is trying to troubleshoot what's going on, and the expert sitting back in the central location or at home. The key here is that it doesn't necessarily have to be an ABB subject matter expert. You could utilize this for subject matter experts even internally to your companies. Next slide, please. So what's nice about this solution is, number one, you have the live video streaming. Number two, you can really, if the video streaming isn't available, you can take a look at even capturing pictures, marking those up and sending those back and forth between the two people on the line. You can look at historical data. I think this is something that's resonating quite well. You have all the activities that have been taken. Now you can access that and even look at past history. What's nice about this as well is that not only can you connect one subject matter expert, but you can connect up to two more. So you could have three people supporting that one person out in the field. So next slide, please. So key takeaways from today. Start with the basics. Evaluate the foundational security controls of your network. Start working towards a secure reference architecture that will help you establish a standard approach to your network, as well as efficiently adopting any type of new cybersecurity or digital solutions. And last but not least, leverage secure remote services to enable your business continuity, especially in times like today. So thank you very much for your attention today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation further. Next slide.
Great. Thank you both to our speakers, and we will hopefully see you all shortly on our next ABB Energy Industries Tech Talks.